is our Minister of Information, Senator Sandra Faulkner. I'm going to turn things over now to Senator Faulkner to make a brief remark and then to invite Minister Phillips to address the briefing.
Good morning, everyone. As you are aware, the government has committed itself to an earlier budget preparation and presentation process than is the usual. As part of those arrangements, the Cabinet met in retreat last week, Thursday. And today, the Minister of Finance and Planning and his team will give us an update, because most of what we heard on Thursday were reports and updates from the finance.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, officials of the government of Jamaica, as has been said already, and as is well known, the new fiscal rules require that the budget be passed before the end of the current financial year, March 31st. As a consequence, Parliament will prorogue in February, and the new estimates of expenditure will be laid on the 17th of February, along with the estimates of revenue and the general macroeconomic outlook will be available in detail to the country at that point in time. Subsequent to that, there will be parliamentary deliberations and then the budget debate. As a consequence of this new timetable, Cabinet considered in retreat the basic outlines of the budget and the macroeconomic situation faced by the country this past week. And as is usual, we are providing an update for the country about the main issues considered and the decisions taken. A lot of time was spent by the Cabinet looking at the overall macroeconomic situation. Also, specific attention was placed on the growth agenda and how to accelerate growth. Attention was also paid to the social protection programs and the poverty alleviation mechanisms in place in the government of Jamaica, and decisions taken with respect to all of those issues. I think it's worthwhile highlighting some of the basic macroeconomic targets and performance to date. The Cabinet took account of the fact, based upon the reports of both the Bank of Jamaica, the PIOJ, Ministry of Finance, of the inflation outturn. The inflation for the calendar year 2014 was 6.4% relative to the 9.5% recorded in 2013. And it is likely that the outturn for the fiscal year is likely to be below the targeted range of 7 to 9%. Took note also of the fact that the rate of depreciation of the Jamaican dollar had slowed to around 7.8%, slower than the 14.4% recorded in the previous year. The interest rates are also declining, and we are seeing continued improvement on the balance of payments of the country. the balance of payments, the current account, of course, measures, simply put, the amount that you're spending in foreign currency terms as against the amount that you are earning or receiving in foreign currency terms. Whereas for 13-14, the estimated deficit is about 8.6%. It is projected to improve for 14-15 to 5.2%. And we must remember that 3 years ago also we were at 15% of GDP in that regard. Our net international reserves stand at approximately $2 billion, with gross reserves expected to cover 17.6 weeks of imports of goods and services. Growth has returned, and we took note of the fact that the third quarter last year was negative because of the drought and the impact of the closure of the Petrojam refinery, which had on manufacturing output, but that there was a confident projection that growth had returned for the quarter ending December 2014 and would in fact be sustained, all things being equal, through the quarter ending March 31st, 2015. Account was taken also of the fact that the unemployment rate at July 2014 was 13.8%, 1.6 percentage points lower than July 2013, and that the employment levels were, increased employment was recorded for all groups except the 20 to 24 age group and the 45 to 54 age group. Overall, the cabinet took the decision that the basic thrust of the economic reform program should be sustained to continue our basic debt reduction path and to unlock the dynamic of growth and employment creation in the economy. And this was one of the central decisions, that the gains that have been made in in correcting the economic imbalances on our national accounts should not be sacrificed, but that more attention needed to be paid on ramping up the growth dynamic in the economy so that we could achieve even greater than targeted levels of economic growth. Significant time, as I said, was also devoted in the discussions to social protection and poverty alleviation, and it was agreed that a National Poverty Reduction Committee be created consisting of high-level state and non-state partners. The PIOJ also has been mandated to update the survey of living conditions to bring it up to date in the quickest time possible so that the policy making can be informed by the most up-to-date data possible. On the fiscal side, it was recognized that, again, that all the basic targets were maintained. The primary surplus target at December was met. The fiscal deficit targets were also met. There continued to be pressure on tax revenues resulting from the underperformance in corporate taxes and in the GCT category, due primarily to lower quarterly declarations by several companies, and that was probably due, in the analysis provided, to the anticipated benefits from the fiscal incentives regime, or at least the delay in the preparation of accounts by many companies on account of trying to take account of and tailor their accounts to take account of the new fiscal regime that was introduced last year. And the tax administration in Jamaica will be increasing its efforts to improve revenue intake using the increased powers available to it legislatively, such as the access to third-party information, the publication of offenders, and will undertake efforts to improve taxpayer information and education. Despite all of that, I think we should note that the tax outturn is above last year's tax outturn, but is about 4%, less than 4% below what was in the targeted range. In any event, the Cabinet issued strict instructions that the basic deficit targets and primary surplus targets were to be observed. The Cabinet's deliberations focused on the main programs to be implemented within the overall budget ceilings to contribute to achieving the following priority objectives: economic growth, job creation, national security and the justice system, social protection, environmental protection, and climate change adaptation, and human capital development. In this regard, I think it should be pointed out that note was taken of the recent business and consumer confidence surveys released by the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, which recognized the improvements in both business and consumer confidence. And perhaps the most critical decision that was taken was that along with the other documents provided to the Parliament, the revenue estimates and the expenditure estimates, that the detailed matrix of the growth agenda should also be presented to the Parliament with the specific performance targets assigned to various ministries, departments, and agencies to allow for wider public participation in the whole growth inducement effort that is being undertaken. And that is certainly a critical part of what was determined. I should point out also that in surveying the risks to the overall program, the Cabinet received extensive briefing with respect to the impending wage negotiations and where we were with regard to the targets for the wages to GDP. Took account of the fact that while the particular needs to provide for wage increases were very important given the restraint that had been done, the Cabinet expressed satisfaction that the government had met all the inherited obligations. Indeed, for settling the reclassification amounts due to the health sector, the educational sector, the correctional officers, firemen, and other similar groups. These amounts amount to more than $12 billion approximately that they had been inherited from the previous administration and met during this administration, so that we were starting, so to speak, the wage negotiations on the platform of having settled most of the outstanding obligations. But it was determined that it was absolutely important that we as a country remain faithful to the overall targets of 9% wages to GDP, and that this was entirely doable, but that it would, and that maintaining those targets would have the greatest benefit for the country as a whole and for the workers who had already made sacrifices in order to stimulate the economic correction and to stimulate a dynamic of growth and development in the country. And the government was, the negotiating team of the government was instructed to approach the negotiations in a spirit of amity, in the spirit of shared responsibility among national stakeholders, and with the aim to maintain the overall fiscal targets that had been entered into by the country in doing it. As it stands now, we are to settle in the next 2 weeks the final budgetary outterms within the targets that have been determined, and we will be in the position early or in the middle of February to lay these in the House. And as I said before, it is going to require perhaps the most extensive test of the political maturity of the country to be able to enter the discussions about the revenues and the estimates and the overall economic reform program in a way that allows for differences of views to be expressed, but at the same time to recognize that ultimately we have an objective to reduce the debt, which was and continues to be the main impediment to growth and development in the country. Thank you very much.
We now open the floor for questions, and remember the rules. We take one question and a follow-up, and then we move on. So, who has the first? Hopeton?
Good morning, Minister.
Morning, sir.
You have stressed the importance of public sector workers to be conscious of not violating your 9% wages to GDP ratio as negotiated with the IMF. My question to you is, should this 9% be violated by the public sector demands for wages who have all trained, for the last 5 years? Would you see these workers or label these workers as being unpatriotic? That's my first question. The second question is...
No, you want me to answer the first one? First?
Okay.
You're giving up... The second is your follow-up?
No, make it us talk one time.
All right.
And you talk one time too, right?
You did not mention the impact of customs revenue, which if my memory serves me correctly, falls under your umbrella, sir. Do you still have responsibility for customs, and you have not mentioned their revenue and what impact their increased revenue over budgeted figure has had on the overall macro figure? And finally, sir, my last question is the valuation.
Hold on. Pass the mic on. We come back to you if we have enough time. Please follow the rules. Yes.
Let me say that, we're not approaching the discussions by labeling anybody, anything. We have tried to maintain our obligations to meet the obligations entered into by the previous administration, but which were not fulfilled, to have discussions in the most forthright way. My expectation is that as we enter into these discussions, that all stakeholders, government, the workers, will recognize that we are all in the same boat, and that that boat is still in very turbulent and difficult waters. I think we all have recognized by this that the world economy is still in a very uncertain situation. Yes, the U.S. economy has manifested some levels of growth. Europe is still very soft. China has slowed down considerably. The World Bank and the IMF have reduced their forecast for global growth. These things will have effect upon us. It will have potential effect on our tourist trade, on remittances, on the bauxite and alumina industry. So, and it's going to have effect depending on what happens outside, on the possible access to financing that Jamaica would face. So, most of all, I think all of us want to ensure that as we move into this phase of negotiations, that we do not, so to speak, cause damage to the gains that are needed by all of us, the continued gains in terms of our macroeconomic targets. So we approach it without, as I said, labeling anybody anything. It's an issue to for us to deal with. The customs collections were marginally above target, marginally, 201 million. Now remember, overall, our revenue targets are in the order of 200 plus billion. So international trade taxes, which include customs, were about less than 1%, marginally above. And a lot of that, we believe, has to do with greater compliance rather than anything else, because we have substantially reduced duties over the past year.
News Talk.
Hi, good morning, Minister, members of the head table. When are wage negotiations going to take place?
I expect that they will begin in the course of the next couple of weeks. Many of the groups have not yet formally submitted their claims. And as soon as a sufficient number, the unit of the Ministry of Finance and Minister Daly will enter into formal negotiations. I would say that at this point, informal discussions are underway with some of the parties concerned.
Okay, would you say that we can expect that the negotiations will end by March 31st, in time for the workers to be?
I can only give you a certainty about the beginning, but I can't give you certainty about the end. But we would hope and will make our best efforts to achieve conclusion with at least the majority of the groups, if not every single one, by the start of the next fiscal year.
Edmond?
Yes, Minister, morning. You mentioned that Cabinet discussed the whole issue relating to the social protection and the poverty alleviation programs. I'm trying to find out what are the government's plans in terms of addressing the plight of the poor, specifically in relation to these programs that you mentioned. And secondly, very quickly, In terms of the outturn for the tax revenues that you mentioned earlier, less than 4% below the targeted range, what specifically accounted for this decline? Could you highlight that?
Well, with respect, in relation to your first question, I think we have to take account of the fact, for example, that the government has adjusted the minimum wage upwards, that it has contained inflation, which perhaps is would have the most devastating impact on the poor. We have raised significantly by much greater than inflation, 15% each year, the provisions under the PATH program. We have put in place a floor in our agreement with the fund, and indeed exceeded that floor for expenditure on social protection programs. We have raised the threshold for income tax, so that we have eliminated persons at the bottom of the ladder from the obligation to pay taxes. Those among other measures. What the decision that was taken by the cabinet in its deliberations was that we should get, first of all, establish an interministerial committee to oversee all the poverty alleviation programs, and that this would have the opportunity, working with the PIOJ, at looking in greater detail at the incidence of poverty across the country, and try to channel some of the responses by various state agencies, whether it be Ministry of Agriculture in relation to dealing with particular areas where there was a higher than average incidence, or to deal with the welfare agencies of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security to specifically target measures. I think I should point out too that a lot of the discussion focused on what is termed the intergenerational transmission of poverty, recognizing that poverty is not just poverty alleviation, and combating poverty is not going to be simply a matter of throwing more budgetary resources at the problem, but looking at the behaviors, for example, that help contribute to this intergenerational transmission, such as the question of teenage pregnancies, such as the issue of bolstering the nutritional status of households, which is partly, which the cabinet considered and took note of, the school feeding programs to be augmented, because children can't learn if they are nutritionally deficient. But at the same time, there's a role to be played in helping households understand some of these nutritional issues, and that would involve a coordinated effort between the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Welfare, and the PATH program, etc. So a lot of effort was spent in that regard. So this interministerial committee will, guided by the data provided by the PIOJ, will try to target some of the responses to the specific categories and geographical areas affected. Yes, yes, and what caused it? Well, I indicated the areas which underperformed was up to December, was corporate tax returns, and the surmise, the estimate of the tax authorities that much of this is likely to be made up in the current quarter because a lot of companies have delayed making returns because, you know, we're still getting used to, they are, and I dare say all stakeholders, still getting used to the new taxation rates and arrangements. And there was also the question of, as was mentioned, in relation to Hopeton's question on the custom side, understanding the new productive input relief regime and what taxes are due. But the TAJ is going to be putting in place compliance efforts to be able to address some of these, and given the priority that we place on meeting our deficit targets.
Observer, we'll go observer first. Balfour.
Sir? Yes, sir. I just wondered if you could clarify two things for me, sir. I understand that during the review of the upcoming estimates, that the taxation committee is to be dissolved and their work to be done by the Standing Finance Committee of the House. And the other question is to do with the green paper on SEZ, where there apparently is some confusion as to why the green paper was tabled and then the Ministry of Finance informed the Ministry of Industry and Commerce that they would have to observe certain taxation incentive issues.
Well, let me say first of all, in respect of the procedures in the Parliament, one of the issues that arises is really the role of the Standing Finance Committee in the light of the new process that we have. And given that the revenue of estimates will be due at that time, and at the same time as the revenue of expenditure, the fiscal policy paper, and the need for that to be considered, as well as the requirements now is that one of the new responsibilities of the Auditor General's Department will be to make an assessment of the fiscal policy paper and to submit that to the Parliament. It was considered, and we have had a dialogue with the House and the House leaders, both opposition, leader of opposition business, leader of government business, the Speaker of the House, was really, we put some proposals to allow the Standing Finance Committee to consider and devote a specific part of its deliberations, which for the past year have been scheduled for 3 days, but concluded in 2 for the past at least 3, maybe more years, to devote itself to issues relating to revenues, the general macroeconomic outlook, the fiscal policy paper, the Auditor General's report, and then to turn its attention to the specific estimates of expenditure, right? So in a way you can have a more, you can involve more people in the House in the discussions of the revenue, etc., and the fiscal responsibilities. You see, I've often said that one of the driving forces for the buildup of the debt is that in the House, everybody in the House is for expenditure, but very few people turn their minds to the revenue side of the equation. So the end result of that is that the easiest thing to do, if you don't want to raise revenue and you want to spend, is to say borrow the money. And the country can't continue to do that.
But are you also saying that the tax committee is no longer relevant?
No, I would be saying that its functions would be taken up by another committee of the Parliament.
Rohan?
No. He had another question.
Oh, sorry.
In,
To explain for us that situation with the green paper.
Oh, the green paper.
no, I'm saying I am about to come to that now. I believe that what certainly from the point of view of the Ministry of Finance, that was a communication between the Financial Secretary and the Permanent Secretary, which made a simple point that the Ministry of Finance has not formally signed off on any numbers. It didn't disagree with any of the proposals there. It is precisely what it is a green paper, which is put there for discussion on the part of stakeholders and everyone else. And indeed, I must say, I was surprised myself that the communication found its way into the green paper document, but that was prepared elsewhere. It what? Which represent proposals. By they represent proposals made by the Ministry of Industry, Investment, Industry and Commerce to the country and through the Parliament. Remember the process of Parliament in relation to policy documents. When you have an overall policy document and you prepare it as a green paper, what it really means is green, it's not yet ripe, it's not yet complete. It is there for discussion, for people to make comments on it, to agree to support propositions, disagree with propositions, submit their views. After that, you get what is called, after the cabinet, with the guidance of the ministry, we're having responsibility for carriage of that policy issue. They will take account of all the comments made and then prepare a white paper which, if agreed to by the cabinet, would represent the final policy position of the government. What is before the Parliament now is a green paper, and that is a discussion paper essentially. And what the Ministry of Finance was doing is essentially saying, through the Financial Secretary, yes, go ahead and put your documents, but recognize no final decision has yet been taken on this. That what?
That would make sense putting those figures into the green paper.
Why not?
It's a proposal.
Why not?
It's a proposal.
It's subject to many other things. It's subject to the response of people. It could remain unchanged. It could be changed and potentially improved. It could be changed in many other different directions. It is just what it is, a discussion paper which was agreed to by the Ministry of Finance.
Rohan?
No, but you know, the problem with the document, with that letter, is that if the joining up is like when you buy a table, it has a joint. But we don't necessarily provide you with a picture of how the man joined it. Right? It is joined, it is the evidence of the joining up that you saw, not evidence of a disagreement. No conflict.
Rohan?
Minister, members of the head table, there has been growing concern about the mounting debts to government agencies, departments for goods and services, Minister. Trying to find out how is the Finance Ministry dealing with this in going forward to try and reduce that significant debt we have heard about.
Well, the first thing that the ministry has done is to ensure that we have met our obligations, that there is no build-up of arrears beyond 90 days as agreed in the economic reform program. there are some particular agencies that have had difficulties. For example, there are issues arising in relation to Ministry of Local Government, parish councils in relation to street lighting, for example. There have been some issues in relation to Ministry of Health and their health budget, and we are in dialogue with those agencies with a view to reducing their debt overhang.
Good morning, Minister and members of the head table. Dr. Phillips, you mentioned that...
I don't think that mic is... Or if it is, maybe it's...
Okay. My name is Tanika Thomas. Tanika Thomas from Scene Caribbean News. We are the news arm. Scene Caribbean News. We are the news arm of Sportsmax, and we broadcast to the diaspora.
There's a news arm.
We are the news arm of Sportsmax.
Where do I find it?
We're on Malines Road.
No, I mean...
No, we broadcast only to the diaspora.
Have to
so
go overseas.
Right.
All right.
That's right.
Okay.
So you mentioned about the growth agenda and that Cabinet focused a lot on the growth agenda. But what directly, where will the growth come from?
Well, you know, Cabinet took account of the fact that there has been more than, say, $56 billion invested in new tourism plant over the past 2 years, primarily along the North Coast, that there is considerable interest in the tourism industry for not only new hotels but for the expansion of existing plant. Took account also of the opportunities in the BPO, business process outsourcing sector, which is seeing a great interest on the part of private investors making their own investments to provide space for the build-out of business process outsourcing operations. Noted the developments in agriculture, among other things in infrastructure, and also took account of the status of the public-private partnerships being developed in relation to Norman Manley Airport, where expressions of interest have been sought from private investors for the private management of the Norman Manley Airport, which would also see a build-out of those facilities for other activities, and of course took note of the present state of the privatization efforts in relation to the Kingston Container Terminal, which negotiations are in their final weeks. Took account of also the discussions that are underway in relation to the railway, where there is a group that is doing due diligence currently to be finished in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And so it also took account of the performance in the, I mentioned already, agriculture, but of those enterprises that had been privatized, like the coffee entities and the cocoa entities, and the opportunities that are provided for farmers there. A lot of discussion was also spent, and a team put together to look specifically at the MSME, medium, small, and micro enterprise sector, with a view to enhancing their access to financing and to business advisory services beyond the level where they now are. So those were among the areas. But I should point out that certainly Jamaica was among the best performing in the Caribbean as far as tourism arrivals were concerned, that the earnings are up above that precisely because whereas 2-3 years ago our properties were discounting to get visitors, they are no longer doing so, and in fact they are moving up to the premium range in properties. We noted the greater drive for import substitution efforts taking place in agriculture, the effort to substitute imported carbohydrate base, for example, in beer production with locally produced things. Noted the interest of others in securing cassava flour for use in the baking industry, and charged the growth agenda subcommittee with working with the different ministries involved to ensure that while government is not going to be involved as an organizer of production activities, the government is not going to start productive enterprises, that there is a role that can be undertaken to ensure that there is more dialogue and that government is not an impediment to these activities. Beyond that, we recognize that there's much that government has to do, despite the gains that have been made in improving Jamaica's ranking as a place for doing business. And indeed, our ranking is now #1 in the Caribbean. That despite that, there is still more that can be done in that regard. We took account also of the revival of the mining industry, mining and alumina, bauxite and alumina industry, with the restart of mining activities scheduled for the St. Elizabeth, for the Alpart plant, and that we are looking for both an improvement in production and revenues in that regard, and a contribution on the energy side of the equation, since part of the revival of the Alpart plant and the modernization of the Jamaica plant involves new energy solutions which will also sell to the national grid and result in a lowering of electricity tariffs overall.
ABCO, we take ABCO, and after ABCO we take one more question.
ABCO Fitzhenley, Nationwide News. Question to Dr. Phillips. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, sir.
You mentioned falling a bit behind in terms of the revenue collection targets for this fiscal year. What's the likelihood for the upcoming fiscal year that you'll have to explore some new taxes, or are you in a position to assure the country no new taxes?
What I am not yet, since we don't have the outturn on the numbers either in relation to the revenues up to the end of the year, nor do we have the final expenditure numbers. I am not in a position to speak to that issue at all.
Okay. Much, sir, has been made of the fact that the administration of which you are finance minister has found over $300 million for the Commission of Inquiry, when we're operating in a very tight fiscal space where there are several sectors that could do with more funds, yes? As finance minister, how do you, in the context of what has been said, of which you are aware, how do you justify that expenditure or planned expenditure?
Well, first of all, I don't know yet what the planned expenditure is. We budgeted $50 million in the supplementary estimates. We have not yet put a number in the estimates for the year to come. So I have noticed all of these numbers being bandied about, which really are not on a very sound foundation. Having said that, someone once said, man shall not live by bread alone. I think the value to the country of understanding fully the events of May 2010 cannot be measured simply by a financial measurement. What we do know is that at least 70 people died. What we do know is that there was a veritable insurrection. Police stations burned down, policemen and military attacked, some killed. What we have is reports of bombings and booby traps. We have allegations of international criminal organizations being allowed a free hand to operate. We have reports of international military forces providing assistance to Jamaica. We have allegations of complicity on the part of persons in authority with criminal organizations. We had tremendous loss of life and of reputation and of security in the country. All of this, it seems to me, is deserving of inquiry. The mechanism available to us within our constitutional arrangements is a commission of inquiry. It should be remembered also that the sentiment that a commission was needed was voiced by the public defender following his initial inquiries. It was supported by almost all stakeholders in the country. All that has been done by the Ministry of Justice is to secure the necessary technical support and resources at rates typical of the profession. Now, what I fear we are seeing is a dynamic which so often besets and I dare say afflicts our country, where consensus swiftly dissipates when partisan interest arises. So, my view is that, as was determined by the Cabinet, these issues are of fundamental importance to determine the quality of our nationhood. It could present an important marker as to a road that we traveled and a road that we should not travel again. But we need to know what that road was and what the elements of that disaster were in all of its dimensions.
We take this.
He said it could. We have not yet put a number in place. They represent estimates that the Minister of Justice said could arise. So we will see. It could take 2 weeks. It could take 2 months. We have to determine what arises. It could be pushed out later. But the fundamental point, so we don't get caught up on your money, issue that you are raising. The fundamental point is that Jamaica, there is no event or very few events in the 50-odd years of our history as an independent country which could rival in its implications for the quality of our nation than those events that came to a head in May 2010. And the country owes it to itself to determine what happened and what is the significance and what, if anything, needs to be done to ensure that nothing like that ever takes place again.
Final question from Nika Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. Nika Lewis from CVM News.
Speak a little louder.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nika Lewis. I'm from CVM News. I have a question, Mr. Minister.
Have a question for who?
For you, sir. Yes. The opposition spokesman on finance, Mr. Audley Shaw, recently spoke to us in an interview, and he advised me that if the money for the FinSAC inquiry was not forthcoming by the end of, well, by the budgetary readings, then there would be some kind of a lawsuit or civil suit of that nature. How do you respond to something like this, sir? Can I do a quick follow-up then?
Yeah?
A quick follow-up. He mentioned that regarding the FinSAC inquiry, way less money was spent, and all that was required to wrap up this inquiry was the report on the findings by the commissioners. He's asking if the $15 million will be produced to complete this report.
No, we have said that if there is secretarial assistance required, then we are prepared to provide that. But the commissioners owe the country a report.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Before we go, let me just give you some dates. Parliament will be prorogued on the 17th of February. We'll have the official opening of Parliament and the laying of the estimates on February 19th. Sorry? Thank you for coming. No, that was an error.
You're coming down.
So
You're coming.
I'm sorry, you need to have your ears cleaned.